Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where you get some surprises. Today's episode has to do with potty training, of all things. So, we are welcoming Rachel Kaplan. She's a licensed psychotherapist with a thriving practice in the San Francisco Bay Area. She's the creator and host of the acclaimed podcast, Healing Feeling Shit Show. She is active on a variety of social media channels and has published multiple features in Common Ground. She studied yoga, meditation, and hands-on healing practices both in India and Nepal. She earned a master's degree in counseling psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies and trained in cutting-edge trauma modalities such as EMDR. She divides her time between Oakland and Joshua Tree, California. And you can find more about her at her great website, thefeelingsmovement.com. And I was just on that website last night, and it's just so joyful and perky and positive. I just love your website.
Thank you so much.
So, Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you to describe your spiritual journey to our audience and how that led you to publishing this book, which will be out in October. So I was pretty excited to get an advance copy. I feel like I'm in the in crowd here. So, Rachel, I'm going to turn the mic over to you, and then I'll ask you some questions, okay?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I know what a big deal it is, and that podcasts are people's babies, so I'm honored to be with your community. And I love that your focus is on spiritual journeys. And I feel like my work and this book and this offering and really my life are deeply connected to my sense of my spirit's purpose in this life. And so it's great to just get right to that. So for me, my journey started with my first love. I was 14 and my first love tragically ended his life, kind of involved me in it to try to say goodbye, but trapped me in a way. And so by, freshman year of high school, I was shattered. And, for maybe a year and a half, tried to plan to die and just moved into my mind and only had thoughts, just cut off all my feelings. But eventually I started therapy and realized that I wouldn't be able to build a life over this empty hole inside. So when I was about 16, I started therapy. And just before I turned 18, my senior year of high school, I had my first big awakening, which it felt much more evolved than it was. It turns out I would spend the next 25 years still healing from that tragedy in a way. But in that moment of reclaiming some of my feelings and having some sense of meaning and trust in life, I embarked on what felt like a spiritual journey. So, in college, I was in India and Nepal studying their forms of spiritual practice and healing practice. I knew by 18 that I was here to be a companion for those walking the path from emotional injury into numbness, back into feeling. And it's really, been the focus of my life. By 24, I started a professional school for therapy in California. And by 26, I was sitting with clients. And to me, the heart of the book is really that it was probably a full decade of seeing clients and being pretty good at it. It's like I've always been really good at being a therapist, but a full decade before I reached a place in my life where I felt like I actually felt whole or worthy or deep self-love and an unshakable baseline of well-being. And because I had been at this for so long and a therapist for so long, I really knew how rare that level of healing was. And so, in the last basically 8 years, I've been on a tireless mission to share the pieces of work, the skills that really made the difference between me kind of looking like I felt great and having a seemingly great life, that hobbling around with my own emotional injuries, to the difference of like really feeling unshakably worthy and lovable. And so my podcast and all of the coursework that you see on my website and this book is really the heart of what I call emotional potty training, which is just a fun, lighthearted way to describe this approach of the two most essential parts of healing ourselves that I think makes a difference between lack of self-love, lack of emotional resilience, and someone who's just like, hey, I'm here and I'm ready to show up in my life.
Yeah. So I'm going to back you up a little bit.
Great.
To your childhood, were you raised in uh, any particular religion? Were you given some foundation to uh, cling to or put your hooks into as you were growing up?
Yeah, I'm Jewish. Both my parents are Jewish. I was raised with some observance. Like I was bat mitzvahed when I was 13. I was in, Hebrew school. Probably shortly after my bat mitzvah, I left. When the tragedy left, meaning I didn't stay in the schooling program. When that tragedy happened, I was still involved. I was involved with the Jewish youth group, which provided me a social place outside of high school where everyone didn't associate me with this tragedy. And it kept me connected to Judaism. But I remember I went to this Jewish summer camp, probably at 16, the summer before I started therapy. And I sat one of the rabbis down and I said, this thing happened to me. Like, what say you of God? And his answer was so unsatisfying that I made a fairly conscious choice to leave Judaism in a way, or to leave this belief in God. And one thing I love about Judaism, which is a huge part of my life still, but it's never been an exclusive thing for me. Like Judaism, I think I feel really grateful to be part of an intact spiritual lineage where, I know these prayers, these old prayers in my bones, and there's so many gorgeous customs around honoring time and rest and joy and loss. Like it's really a brilliant technology. And I think it's rare for someone in our modern times to have community that's so rich and bright around this very lively technology. So I love Judaism. And one of the things I love about it, but as a young person was really hard for me, was that there are sects of Judaism, that's SECTS, that
Yeah.
are more prescriptive or orthodox, or say, this is what it means to be Jewish. This is what we believe in. Absolutely. The orthodox groups are incredibly specific. But most schools, like more reform or renewal, there's a lot of questioning. In fact, the name, means to wrestle with God. And so in a moment when I was so fragmented and lost and couldn't believe that this kind of thing happens, this level of devastation happened, Judaism didn't give me a lot. And interestingly, as I started waking up to just coming back into my body and into my emotions, which I think is the most spiritual thing we could do. Like, I think in my life, spiritually, I've gone from a place of being interested in transcending. And when I first started studying Eastern religions, like this idea of like liberation, enlightenment. And at a certain point, like I just have become uninterested in that. I think the most potent way that I find that we can experience spirituality is by deeply embodying our human vessel and really being, awake to the spirit that's in our lives, in our bodies. And so for me, there was, as I started healing, just from being willing to feel again, that started that spiritual journey. And yeah, it's been profound. I mean, I feel like for me, Judaism kind of provides a way to engage with life and people that I love. But like the real sense of spirit is like way beyond that for me. And it's, and right now I'm in a phase of just nonstop hustle. Like my spirituality is like having 7 jobs and being so overworked because I know it's my mission to share this, this medicine, this help that I've been lucky enough to excavate and receive like with others. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope
No,
so.
it did. Very thoroughly. Thank you. But it sounds to me like it would be helpful for you to take some of your own advice from the book in terms of slowing down and giving yourself, I don't know, that break, that self-care that you espouse so much. Are you,
Yeah, well, I do walk my talk as far as the main thing this book is teaching people is how do you find the parts of you that are fragmented, bring them in, help them feel their feelings and release their pain. And I am a very avid, regular feeler, and I feel like I quickly can rebound my emotional baseline through having my feeling. And in 2025, I plan to relax a little more. I just took a week off work last week, which was great. And I hadn't done it in a couple years, but I have a full time psychotherapy practice, and getting this book to the place where it's ready to enter the world has been a big project. Now, talking to people like yourself to let people know about the book. And I also just booked a TEDx talk the week after the book. So this is just a moment of a lot of work, but I promise you, I can't wait to relax. I also, one last thing I'll say is I bought a house, which is also a retreat center down in the desert in California in Joshua Tree. And I also live in Oakland. So, having 2 homes I pay for is also keeps me on the grind. So I'm very much tracking like, how can I make sure I don't burn out, but
right.
right now it is a spiritual practice to be working so hard to kind of meet this moment of like being lucky enough to have the fruits of my life, brought out into the world through a book. So yeah, I'm gonna chill out soon. I just thought, I mean, next year's.
Okay. All right. Uh, so in getting to the point where you determined it was time to put this out as a book, and backing you up, I guess, to the point where you determined that potty training was a good metaphor for the kind of therapy that you do and what people had to do to get through these blockages, because typically, well, blockages, let's go to energy work, let's go to Reiki, let's go to Qigong, let's go here, let's go there, and let's do yoga. In terms of getting those blockages unblocked, uh, and your process that you've been able to perfect over the years. Uh, what made that so poop related?
It's a great question. Yeah, and just for any listeners, it's I call it emotional potty training. So basically, when we were little, our caregivers were deeply invested in teaching us how to respond to the sensations we got in our bodies, in our guts, that we needed to poop. And so we all learned, for the most part, most people learned that the only way to not have that cramping sensational signal is to use the bathroom and to leave a poop. I've learned in all my years of now of talking about poop that we say we take a poop, but we don't actually take it. We leave it, right? So emotions are similarly physical sensations. They're clusters of sensation in the body, and they are signaling a need for something to move through the body. In fact, if you take the E off the word emotion, and I'm sure this won't be new for your listeners, you have motion. So the word literally means movement, means to move. Some people say energy in motion. And yet, for most of us, we weren't taught that when you have these, like maybe when you have heat stirring because you're angry or you want to explode, or when you feel a heavy collapsing sensation in your chest that you need to cry, that no one taught us that, oh, that's good, go with that, let that happen and you'll feel better. In fact, most parents, from their benevolence and their love, they taught their children there's nothing to be afraid of. You're okay. You're fine. And in worst case situations, there was a lot of harshness toward children's emotions. And the reason is it's relentless, as I imagine you and your listeners know, to be a parent. It's very hard to, feed your child, get groceries if they're sprawled out on the floor of the grocery store having an emotional meltdown, right? And so there's a lot of very loving parents conditioning their young children out of feeling. And our society and our economy add right to that. And there's various kind of notions about men or boys not being emotional, or notions that you're weak if you're vulnerable or you cry. There's all of these systems that are conditioning us out of feeling our pain. And as organisms, just human organisms, most of us try to avoid pain. And so what it leads to is people who for decades when they get the signal from their guts that or from their hearts or from wherever it is, an emotion needs to happen, they're turning toward distraction, toward substance, toward overconsumption. And what it leads to is a humanity. It leads to a depression, anxiety, addiction, hatred, violence. Like the problems we see in our culture are profoundly connected to our inability to digest the emotional pain of our humanity. And I think one of the things, just specifically for your audience, people who are oriented towards spirituality, it's a real, you have to be careful when you orient toward just energy without emotion, right? Or toward trying to, like I said, when I was young and I was trying to transcend my human experience. Like a lot of people doing spiritual work are also trying to avoid their emotional pain. And so you get this kind of fragmented, maybe you have all these ideas that you're good or you're enough on the surface, but there's a part of us deep down that feels like I'm a worthless sack or I'm not good enough. And so until we include the emotions, until we retrain the body so that the emotions can move through the body and we can recover from that, and we rebuild those skills that we would have been or should have been, and I use should very carefully. I don't like to should myself or others, but we should have been taught this when we were little. This is how you safely express anger. This is how you go and cry and recover. It's like, but we weren't. We were taught how to poop. We weren't taught how to emotionally poop. And so until that happens, I just think wellness isn't possible. Like if you ate food in your life and you never pooped, you'd never be well. In fact, you'd probably die. And it's similar. Like you can't be well as a human living in the world where we're inundated with all kinds of everything without feeling. And I think that this is just so essential. And, and if it was as simple as saying, have your feelings, we'd have a bumper sticker, not a book. But because we've all spent decades not feeling, we have to learn how to do it. And that's really what I'm here for. And I think it's essential and fun to teach. And I like the lesson I'll say is I like that it's lighthearted, that everyone poops, that a lot of us have a little bit of shame about our poop. It's a private thing for most people. But I think that bridge of like, we feel a little funny about talking about our poop is helpful because I think people feel worse about the part of them that feels like poop. And I want to just lighten up the whole conversation.
Okay. So I have a question about trauma, I guess, because
About what?
trauma. I mean, we talk about trauma being stored in particular places within the body, or trauma being actually expelled from the body in a way that can be surprising. And the reason I say that, I guess, is that I was involved at some point in a situation where somebody offered me a soul retrieval. And that wasn't anything I'd ever heard about before. But she let me know that she was able to identify that a piece of my soul had actually broken off during a traumatic incident in my childhood, and that she could now retrieve that for me because I was spiritually ready to accept that back. So I guess, and I see you shaking your head, yes, like this sounds like something familiar to you. So can you tell me how that works in terms of the emotional potty training scenario?
Yeah, well, I would ask you, once she brought that part back, did you feel different? Did you have more of the memories or feelings or sense of wholeness from that young part of you? Did it change anything for you?
It it did make me feel freer. I guess is the only word that I would use. Uh, and being male, I probably culturally have a more difficult time getting in tune with my feelings. Uh, so it's often, and I looked at your book in terms of keys that you offer to get in touch with those feelings. Because for me, that's critical. I wanted to see,
Yeah.
okay, practically, how do I get in touch with my feelings uh, so that I can process them?
Yeah.
And
Beautiful.
and happily, I found answers
Great.
that,
Yeah.
that that you did provide those. The book may put you out of business because people won't need you anymore, but
Well, that's good. That's good. That will live
yeah,
a great life. If I can really change and contribute to the conversation so that someone's genuine healing doesn't take them 25 years, like that will be a life well lived. That is my legacy. I've never wanted children. I just want to help with this. And just to answer your question, I have also had soul retrievals, and one of my dear earliest friends, his cousin is a renowned shaman and has done, and so I've had a lot of experiences in these realms, and I have a lot of ritual, divination, spiritual practice that's alive for me. I don't engage in it as much as I'd like because I'm so busy, but
yeah,
it's like I don't discredit any of it. And I think that as a culture, we go toward big external experiences, or like the way that the therapeutic world is orienting towards psychedelics right now. We want it quickly, we want it big, we want to go to a medicine journey and have this thing. And what I have found is that like it's hard to integrate. And that I think the most precious, important thing is learning how do we bring our regular consciousness, our daily Rachel and Bob sense of self awareness into the parts of us that are in pain or that got cast out or repressed, and reintegrate that and release the pain and then recover from that moment. Like I think a daily or weekly practice of that is going to create a lot more resilience and a lot more of a sense of wholeness and integrity and feeling like you are the one doing it. And in with my work, you said I might put myself out of business. What I'm doing with clients is I'm teaching their system. I joke in the book that I'm a Wi-Fi hotspot. It's like to be able to connect to these huge old pains and have them move through us requires very strong connection. It's like right now, I feel like our Wi-Fi connection is not that great. I'm not sure. We'll see what happens. Like if you go to the airport and you wanted to watch a movie on your device, it's just not strong enough bandwidth. You're not going to get this huge file of a movie onto your device, right? And it's similar that these old wounded parts are very big files. And so to connect to them enough that they flow, we need a very strong connection. And I am providing that for people, but I'm teaching them how, and the book teaches people, how do you provide that for yourself? And so, we go through, there's a few chapters on the basics of how do you move your awareness into your physical body, your sensations, your parts in pain. How do you find flow? How do you recover? And then we go into anger, sadness, fear, and shame for specific techniques. But a lot of the, techniques are like, how do you enhance your bandwidth? So how do you use music or media or nature or art to help you have a strong enough capacity to connect to these pain parts and have flow? And so I think that, the soul retrieval, the medicine journeys, someone else looking at your system and doing it for you. Sure, it's great. It's fun. It's helpful. But I think we need to supplement that and create like a foundation in our own capacity to be with ourselves. And it's hard work, and I don't think we all know how.
No, I agree with you there. I don't know. I don't know if you've read Michael Singer's work. He's all about relax and release. And,
Right.
the terminology sounds easy. All you've got to do is let it go. But boy, we're not real good at letting things go.
No,
We want to hold on to all of that. And
yeah. Right.
so it does take work. Yeah.
It does. And also, once you decide you want to let something go, it's easy to approach these pretty vulnerable parts of us with that kind of alpha exploitative like demand. So these are parts that that we essentially locked up in our, subconscious and our emotional basement for decades of our lives. And now we're like, oh, the hip thing is to feel my feelings and let it go. So we turn to them and we're like, perform, and it's like what I would say to anyone who doesn't want to read the book and you don't want to take the time. It's really that act of release comes from care. It's about giving permission and allowing yourself to be as sad or as scared or as ashamed as you are. It's really about finding these parts that have been beat up in our lives, first from the outside world, but usually from ourselves, and trying to be caring toward them. And so I just say that because, the more aggressive we get about the let go, the less they're going to actually open up. It's like this dance of committing to the journey and following through, but being really soft.
Yeah. Yeah. So would you recommend like a daily scan where you check in with all your body parts and your emotions and figure out, what's going on and where is it stored, and then, identifying those places?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I would say that inner scan, that inner awareness, bringing our attention inside and noticing what's happening and where we're feeling what, ideally would eventually become almost a constant experience where you're tracking one part of you is on the, lookout for something percolating, just like, we're not always minute by minute. And I've never used this metaphor I'm going to use right now. So you don't have to wonder all day long if you have to poop. Your body tells you when you have to. And when you get to a certain place where you're kind of caught up with like some of the backlog release of emotional storage, like when you get to a place where you're pretty present with your body and willing to feel your feelings and you know how, it's a very similar thing where if something's off, you'll feel it. because you're in your body and you now know how to feel your emotions. It's not like that at first. And so I do think creating more of a practice, like you're saying, of going in and slowing down and removing distractions and trying to feel is helpful. Now, for most people, if the intention was to actually have a release session versus just knowing what's going on, every day is too much. So I would say, like, if someone is new to this and they're trying to create, time for a feeling session or a feeling party, sometimes I call it, or an emotional release session, going for like maybe 3 times a week would be great. But I think that is one aspect where you might, it's almost like if you were to go to the gym a few times a week, you set up time, and some people want to do it every day. I'm one of those. So like, that makes me sane. Exercise can't get better than exercise. But it's like, it's a similar thing where you set up time and you get into an ideal situation where you can have this certain type of experience that will be good for you. I think what you're speaking about of that tracking and that kind of awareness of what's happening is ideal to get it to as close to constant as possible. And the only other thing I'll say is that I don't think the word figure out. I know what you mean, but I think as a culture, we're so interested and overly relying on asking why we feel what we feel or trying to understand what we feel. And just to know, especially if you're not going to read the book, all of this thinking about what we feel is basically an effort to escape what we feel. And if you notice you start to feel like a heaviness or an anger or some kind of stirring of emotion, you immediately say to yourself, why am I feeling that? You're basically telling yourself you shouldn't feel that. And so I think a more useful question, if you have to ask one, is how do I know? It's how. Because understand, there are so many people who have very complex stories and understandings of why they feel what they feel, who are completely stuck in dysfunctional patterns. And so like why we only ask why when we think we shouldn't. Like if you said, okay, Rachel, lovely to talk to you. I'm going to work. I'm going to go do my next job or my next interview. I wouldn't say why. Right. Or if I told you I had to go to work today, you wouldn't say why, because you'd understand. Okay, you're an adult, you have bills, you're going to work. But if I said I'm angry with someone, you might say why, as if I shouldn't be. And so I think one of the things you want to learn to do is stop shooting ourselves, stop trying to, subtly say this is wrong and just start to, oh, I've noticed a feeling. How is it? How is it inside my body? Just come right into the study of the phenomenology.
So when I think of emotions and feelings, I think about things that trigger me.
Mm-hmm.
Like suddenly I have that feeling and I have to look around and say, what's that connected to? What is it
Yeah.
that created that feeling?
Yeah.
And often it's so removed from my consciousness that I really have to figure something out there. Like, okay, where'd that come from? And if I'm not going to ask why, it if I use how, as you're suggesting, uh, then I want to get at a way to either lessen that feeling or process it in a way that it's not going to be triggered again by the same thing that triggered it the last time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for instance,
And
if I'm just walking down the street and I see a political sign that affronts me, or I decided that it affronts me, even though it's just a sign, it's just a thing over there somewhere. Uh,
Mhm.
then I have to figure out, okay, what's that about? And can I take that trigger and turn it into, it's just an object. It's just a sign.
Yeah. And I do want to say that that effort to understand what's happening inside you is valuable. The problem is that if we do it the moment we have a feeling, instead of just trying to have the feeling or assessing it's not the appropriate time to have the feeling and saying, okay, I'll come back to you in an hour. Sometimes it's not the time to have a big emotional release, right? Like if you got triggered in this call or I did, we wouldn't, say 1 second and just melt down, right? We're trying to do something. And there's lots of moments like that. So, but when you're actually trying to feel the feeling, that analysis will limit your ability to. And so just like to use your example. So let's say that you notice over time, maybe a couple experiences, or maybe just one that when you have a certain emotional reaction to a political side, right? So what I would say is you notice, oh, I suddenly feel really shaky, or I suddenly feel really angry. I feel like I want to yell at someone and explode. What I would say is that, if you're like, okay, maybe you're walking down the street, you don't have anywhere to be. All right, well, I'm going to work with that. I'm going to stomp a little bit, or I'm going to go into that park and shake my body. And, like you might uncover, I'm actually really afraid of what's going to happen in the election, or I'm really afraid of my safety or my children's safety. And so if you kind of allow it enough to notice, like basically the basic energetic of the feeling, like is it frenetic? Is it collapsing? And in a way, emotions can be simplified into two main energetics. There's up and out, the explosion of anger, or the freneticness of fear, terror. That's like, fight or flight energy that's really frenetic. And then there's the heavy collapse of grief and sadness, or the paralysis of freeze fear, right? So, and I try to break it down into very similar or very simple energetics. So it's like that question of, is it this or this, is really helpful. Because if you follow the feeling, the fastest way through the feeling, you want to reduce the feeling, have it. Like the feelings don't last. They're so short-lived once we know how to get out of the way. People are afraid that if they start to feel, they'll get stuck in their feelings. I'm like, good luck crying for 5 minutes. Like, I will reward you if you can sustain, as long as someone didn't die or you didn't just get dumped. Like, it's really hard actually to stay with our feelings. And so, tuning into, what does my body want to do? Do I want to yell? Do I want to explode? Or do I want to twaddle myself and feel helpless and cry? So it's like, yes, there is something that's activating you around politics, and it is bringing up feelings. And, for me, like as someone who's really espousing that we be emotionally integrated and finding spirituality through my embodied humanity, I don't have a goal of not having feelings. Feelings are not a problem for me. Even being triggered, like it's information. And I'm not acting out from my triggers too often. Occasionally, recently, I've been stressed. I'm like, gosh, I wasn't nice to that person from my mortgage company. Like, it's not like I'm perfect. But I actually think that as we move down this healing path, your feelings won't be a problem in the same way that they are in the beginning, where you've been conditioned out of them, and therefore they're really alarming and you don't know if you'll recover from them, and you don't necessarily have the skills to kind of clear them. And so I don't know. I think there's like a liberated state of like just being a human with feelings and it not being a problem.
Yeah. Okay. So it is getting to that point in our discussion where I give the guest an opportunity to leave the audience with some words of wisdom. Now, there's a whole book full of wisdom here. So maybe not that many words, but
Yeah.
feel free to leave the audience with whatever you'd like. I will say that I do recommend your website. So if you would repeat your website that people can go to connect with you. And I will have a a link from my website to your website also for people to find you. Okay?
Thank you. My website is The Feelings Movement, and that is plural feelings, movement.com. And it's both a revolution kind of movement and also the movement through the body. And yeah, it's a good question. Like, what do I want to leave the listeners with? I think at the heart of it, it's like, I want to speak to the part of each of us, each of you, that might feel bad inside or doubt whether you're good enough or you're doing it right or you're, acceptable or lovable. And just to say that the fruit, the gift that's available to you through emotional potty training is that you wake up at a bone deep level, like at a really felt sense that to the truth that you're not bad, you feel bad, you felt bad, and that that you're able to reclaim your sense of enoughness and value and worth, by welcoming the parts of you, really honoring and centering the parts of you that felt bad. And the secret sauce is just being brave enough to learn how to feel as bad as you feel. And that through that practice of learning how to feel as bad as that part feels, you can heal to a place where you no longer feel bad and you're not bad. And I know that for most of us, that it might even be uncomfortable with me speaking to a part of you that feels bad because we don't even want to admit that we have that. But I think if we're honest, we know that there's that lurking suspicion that we're somehow blowing it. And so I just want you to know that that's normal. It's a very natural byproduct of being a human and being raised by humans, and that there is a way to just rest in your worth and your value. And it's through the door of feeling as bad as you feel. And I'm here to help. I'm here to help with the book and through all the programs in my website.
Okay, great words to leave the audience with. And audience, as usual, take what resonates with you, put the rest on a shelf until you're ready to deal with it. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.